I think we should introduce ourselves and then just go.
Okay.
Should we do that?
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll go first. So I'm Andy, I teach improv, and that's how I got to know Lex. And we're interested in having a little chat around the connections between improv and kink.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I am coming from the kink side of it. So I'm Lex and I run Pleasure Rebels and I am a kink and sex educator, but kind of focus on empowerment and embodiment. And yeah, I met Andy because I did some improv classes years ago now.
Yes, it
Um,
was a few years ago, wasn't it? Was that
yeah,
2020, I
I
think?
think it was.
Yeah,
Yeah,
has
yeah.
been a while, yeah. And we just got really interested in these connections between like improv world and kink world. And we thought that would be a really interesting conversation to have and to share for people in improv world who know nothing about kink and people in kink world who know nothing about improv. Yeah, so
Mm.
that's what we're gonna do.
May I share about our recent collaboration?
Sure, yeah.
So I teach a program for people who are curious about learning how to be in the dominant role in kink, but in a really sort of ethical, responsible way. And I invited Andy to come along and do like a guest class. Um, and part of that, we've been having lots of discussions around like what is the overlap? What is the overlap and why improv and why kink? And there just seems to be so much in this. That yeah, it's nice to have a little chat and just talk a little bit more because I'm definitely not an expert in improv. So
Yeah.
it's really great to talk.
Yeah, and we found lots. I think it might be useful, Lex, probably for my benefit as well, to sort of describe a little bit like what kink is.
Mm.
And I can describe a little bit about improv. I think people are probably more familiar with what improv might be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I have a very broad view of kink. So it has lots of official definitions that you'll find out there in the world. Some that are not that supportive or favorable. Um, my definition of kink that I work with is it's a way of exploring connection based on what you actually experience as connection as an individual. So a lot of times, in society, we kind of have this idea of intimacy and connection and what that is like or should be like. And it also means there's like a bit of a hierarchy. So we tend to think in society like the most sacred form or the most valued form of intimacy is like usually heterosexual couple who are married and like romantically in love and then they like have this beautiful physical connection usually to make babies. That's like the most pure form, and anything that deviates from that or is different to that is kind of perceived as a little bit odd or weird. And for me it's actually, I think what I'm learning is kink is appealing to more and more people because that view of intimacy or that view of connection doesn't work for so many groups of people for different reasons. So for me, it's about kind of putting that idea to one side and just exploring like what's connecting for you. What do you enjoy? And that might be something that's like really platonic and playful. It doesn't have to be kind of like sex in the way that we tend to think of
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Ah,
What about improv? Because
that's
I know
really
you.
interesting. Well, yes, I was just drawing some sort of links then. So I call my classes like Play Connect, like my website name
Mm,
and stuff. And I think there's something really valuable here in improv as well. So often when we've seen improv on TV, it might be quite performative, like about how someone comes across to the audience, right? Are they witty? Are they clever?
mm,
Are they fast? That kind of thing. And that can be great. And I love going to see improv shows. People are really talented. But there's this other side of it, which is for me, one of the most interesting bits is for the experience of doing it. And for me, that
mm,
comes alive in the connection in the moment between the two
mm,
people who are playing in a scene or in a game. And there's just something so so joyful and so enlivening about that. And also in improv we kind of celebrate weirdness, just to pick up on another theme, right? Because like in lots of parts of life it's all about, okay, there's this sort of uh fairly narrow definition of what a grown adult is supposed to be, the things you're supposed to do. And actually in improv we love weirdness. It's like, because there's no plans, we're just making things up, we're responding in the moment. Often you'll say or do something that's a surprise even to yourself, and you're like,
Yeah.
whoa, like where did that come from? And actually I love that. Those are the most delicious bits.
Oh, yeah.
um,
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's come up for me is like around improv is, yeah, you were saying like most people tend to know what improv is. And I noticed that when I talk about improv, people might have heard of like contact improvisation as well. So like I wonder if there's just something around kind of defining what kind of improv we're talking
Yeah,
about.
thank you. Yes, because it could be jazz, it could be
Mm,
TV improv, it could be comedy improv, it could be
yeah.
dance, improvised dancing, whatever. So what I do, you'd roughly call it theatrical improv, I think, is like the area. It's usually funny, um, not because anybody's trying to be funny,
Mm,
but just because human beings, when we let ourselves be seen, human beings are weird and funny, and then that's where the joy comes from. So we're making up scenes, we're finding characters, we're playing games, we're allowing ourselves to be seen in, and embracing our weirdness, allowing ourselves
mm,
to be a bit off kilter. I sometimes think in terms of like letting go for a bit of the inner censor, the inner editor that kind of goes, oh, shouldn't do that, oh,
mm.
shouldn't say that, and allowing that to flow. Um, because I don't know why, it's just this roomy thing that's come to mind. Um, he says, uh, do not seek for love, instead seek to find and remove within yourself all the barriers you have built against it.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
And I think, like, maybe it sounds a bit grandiose, but in amongst the laughing and the messing around, we're just kind of trying to let go of some of these barriers that we build around ourselves.
God, it's funny like hearing you describe what improv is to you, because I feel like we could have just swapped our roles at the beginning and you could have been talking about King. Like
Right.
honestly, if we took that out, I could like
Yeah.
soundbite that and you could be talking about what kink is. You know, this like
Right.
idea of like being seen, like playing different roles or characters or embodying different parts of ourselves, like the games, this like embracing our weirdness, like
Yeah.
all of these things. That's
Mhm.
part of, for me at least, part of the joy that I take from kink. It's a space to, yeah, as you say, let go of some of these like expectations, some of which are like just implied, of
Mm.
like how we need to be as adults. So we have to be serious, we have to be act a
Mm.
certain way, everything has to be very like sort of straight and
Yeah.
for a reason, for like an output.
Yeah. I think we might have talked about this previously, Lex. This there's a utilitarian uh, sort of industrial approach that's very dominant in society. It's like you only do something if you're an adult, you do it in order to get something else, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're like, apply for a job to get a job to earn some money, so you get the money, so then you can do this thing, so you can do that thing, and it's always just chasing the next thing, the next thing.
Yeah.
And there's often a missing piece in many people's lives, which is the things that we do for their own sake, not in order to get anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So for some people, it might be playing a musical instrument, for example, if they're not professional. But yeah, it's so wonderful to have that kind of thing in our lives. it doesn't have, it's not about getting to, it's not in order to achieve a different thing. It is
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah. And I like, don't get me wrong, I think that there are ways in which kink can be for a purpose. You know, there's a whole kind of like aspect of kink that's about kind of healing or transforming or changing our story around something that might have happened to us. It's, you know, it's kind of that, it's not therapy, but it's like that therapeutic side of it. And people might come into kink because they want to explore a part of themselves or escape part of, you know, their everyday life. But there, yeah, there's this big part of it that's, it's tapping into that something that we're missing. I think, as you say, day to day, when we're so focused on, you know, extracting from ourselves, like, oh, I have to use my energy, I have to use my time, I have to use my money to like always be growing and building. And there's just something so blissful about just doing something for the sake of it. And the thing that was coming to mind for me when you were saying about that missing piece, the word that kept coming up for me is like presence. And I think that that's something that for me feels really like a commonality between what I've experienced in improv when it's really good and what I've experienced in kink when it's really good is presence. You know, you're not focused on like, okay, what's next? How is this benefiting me? How is this, you know, you're just present with what is.
Yeah, maybe because you've got experience of both worlds, Lex, in a way that I don't. I know in improv would certainly say if you start thinking, if you're in a scene and you start thinking ahead about, oh, I know what would be really good if this happened next, it can jam us up because we're stuck in our heads. So we practice kind of coming back to the here and now, here and now. What can you like? We've gone deep straight away, haven't we? But there were some like surface level similarities that I wasn't aware of. Like, am I right that in kink it's called a scene, right?
Yeah.
And there's like some really like things that are right there on the surface that are very similar.
Absolutely. Yeah. So like in kink, we use scene to mean two different things. So there's the scene, which is the community in a way of like people who are into kink, and then the play, or that kind of like container for play is also a scene. So yeah, very similar to improv. Like I heard you say scene earlier, yeah, and I was like, oh yeah, scene. Yeah, we also say scene. But yeah, there's lots of different ways, I think, that like, yeah, without going into like the deep psychological stuff that I always want to dive into, but like, yeah, on the surface, I think there's just lots of ways that they're similar. Like, the fact that like, yeah, come back to that scene, like the container, like the boundaries that we set, like are what allows it to then be fun, because we can let go when we've kind of set the size that we can let go and we can kind of be fully present. We can get to that presence that we were looking for. And I think they're both just forms of like play for grown-ups as well. Yeah. I think we need those spaces, absolutely.
And I think this is something like a useful comparison as well. Like what you just said there about the container is what enables the freedom. And for me, and I think in most modern improv, has become much more aware of creating physical, psychological safety in a container in order to allow for the fun to happen. Perhaps in the past, I think improv maybe was a bit less aware of that than the kink scene, and was a bit like, yeah, whatever happens, happens. I think people now have got a lot clearer about that, which has been a good thing.
Yeah. And I do feel like, at least in my experience in the kink community, it's like it is evolving as well. And that absolutely have been times where, you know, growing up, I say I was accidentally kinky and we weren't spending time negotiating and things were just slapdash. It's like, oh, let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
But I think that people are becoming more aware, thankfully, that like, you know, even play can be really profound and deep as an experience. And we, you know, it is important, particularly because of some of the ways in which people can play with kink, that like negotiation and like making sure that we have consent from all parties is really, really important. And the specificity around that as well. So, you know, making sure that we don't just say, oh yeah, we're going to do this thing, and like we just all assume that we know what that thing is, but like getting more and more specific. So I think the kink world is also evolving, and in many ways I think just to kind of celebrate the kink community in a way, I feel like it is leading the way in many respects around kind of around like negotiation, around being more accepting of other people. And I think there's so much that like we could then take from the kink world into like day-to-day intimacy. So yeah, I think it is, I don't want to say it's always been that way, but it seems to be kind of one of the spaces in which like really explicit communication and negotiation is like a key part of how now. Yeah.
Because I think both of these things, well, this is my impression. You tell me. We're often dealing with things that might be really fun on one level, but it's also often like for many adults, it's reclaiming parts of ourselves that we might have told ourselves at some point we're not supposed to do. Like, oh, I'm not supposed to be playful. I'm not, you know, I'm the clever one. I'm not the funny one. That kind of thing. Or I'm the, you know, the sporty one, not the sexy one. And then actually that process of going, oh no, I can be that as well. I can be that as well.
Yeah.
Can be very liberating, but there's often a lot going on for people like in that process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that like my interest in kink is precisely that. It's like the empowerment that's possible through kink. So by kind of going into these like defined containers and explicitly saying, oh, I want to explore, I don't know, I want to explore being somebody who's just like the sexiest person in the world, or like I am the king of all the lands, you know.
I love how you say that.
Like exaggerating that power and trying it on. What that can do is then give us like just a taste of that, give us an experience of it. And I'm not saying like, you know, as a result of that, I'm then walking around Tesco like I'm the king. I don't need to pay. You also,
I wish you would.
I'm gonna do that later, see what happens. But yeah, I think that like it's so important for people to have, essentially this is like having embodied experiences of different aspects of ourselves. Like we all want to feel empowered, we all want to feel in control, and we act that out in different ways. But when we kind of make it an explicit role that like I'm trying on, I get a taste of it that then I can go, oh yeah, I can feel a little bit more comfortable in my power. And yeah, I think it's just, yeah, it's something that can still be really fun, right? You can have that scene as the king of the world and it can be hilarious in kink. It can be really silly, and yet there's something else happening beneath the surface. And that's the beauty of it, really.
Oh, we just started my beginner's course this week, and I just love it so much because it's like you can see people kind of just reclaiming their freedom, their joy, their playfulness, just their willingness to kind of be silly, laugh, and have fun. And yeah, and it can be a beautiful thing in itself, but then also it can begin to spread into the rest of life as well, just become a more accessible thing.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, how does kink like integrate into people's lives?
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking about starting the beginner's course, I had such like a yummy recollection of what it was like doing that. And just, yeah, I mean, when I was doing the improv course, I was still working in corporate and like absolute chronic people pleaser, perfectionist, hated the idea of improv, hated it. And
But that's often a good sign, right? Around this kind of thing. Like if you have a like a being feeling drawn, but also, oh my God,
yeah,
then
yeah,
that's actually for men, not just improv, but kink or whatever, anything. That's
yeah,
often a sign of that. Oh, there's something juicy here. Sorry, Lex, I
absolutely.
interrupted
Yeah.
you, but
No, I was just, yeah, so
yeah.
when you talk about doing the course, I had all those feelings come back of like
Mm,
that, the nervousness and the like, oh,
mm.
almost like toe curling, like, oh, just, it's so,
Ah.
but also like, yeah, the impact it had. And I think, yeah, I see that now in people who, for example, people doing like my dom training, there's that same kind of feeling of like, oh God, I really like don't know if I could do this. I want to get it right, and all of those things. They'll show up in improv and they'll show up in kink scenes as well.
Mm,
But yeah, that I think how it ripples out, that's one of the things that I talk about a lot in ethical kink as well, is that like sometimes in the kink world there's this kind of like frame of mind that like because we're creating these containers, like these boundaried negotiated containers in which we're going to play, so our scenes, that like that's then separate to the real world. And in a way, we are creating a separate environment so that we can step into it and fully play those roles. And then we want to come out and I want to be Lex, who does need to go to Tesco and do my shopping, and but I think in order for it to be ethical, we have to realize that that's going to have implications. That even though we're playing in that container and it's boundaried, I'm potentially changing as a person as a result of that. So when we're engaging in kink ethically, we're also talking about, okay, what impact is this going to have, on my, let's say, on my partner, or on how I show up in work, or just what I want from life. Like we have to consider that the
mm.
stuff that we're doing is going to impact other people, even if they're not in the scene. But yeah, what I see is, I think like shift happening in people who, I mean, people who come and work with me have generally done lots of like self-development work. They're really self-aware already, really emotionally intelligent. And yet a lot of empowerment work out in the world is putting a lot of pressure on the individual to kind of like fix something about themselves. Like, oh, well, you should just be able to be confident. You should walk into the room, say these things, and people like, just do as you say. What it doesn't speak to is the context in which somebody learned that they weren't empowered. And so I think like in improv and in kink, we're giving people, as I say, these embodied experiences, and we're doing it in a way that feels
Yeah.
accessible, because it's like, well, just for this minute, like you're just going to play. What's it like to play and be like, take up space and be powerful or be bossy? And then it gives them an experience of like, oh, I did something different. I survived. Oh, it might have even been
Yeah.
fun. And then it just ripples out, and the impacts, not everyone who does the training with me goes on like to be a professional dominant. I'd say very, very, very few people do. Actually, people want to do this to be more empowered in their lives. And that could look like, putting yourself forward for that promotion in work, deciding that this relationship needed more boundaries, just having more of a sense of like being able to take up space in the world.
Mm.
So I think it's both of
Power,
those things.
yeah.
Yeah, they both
Yeah,
have
power is one of those things, is one of those areas where a lot of people have kind of taboos, blocks that they've kind of,
mm-hmm.
we've said, oh, that is a difficult thing to be with. And
Yeah.
I think fun for many people is also that, and playfulness can be that, particularly people who maybe kind of grown up in the, and like their thing was being clever and getting things right and knowing the answer and all that stuff through school or whatever, then like it can be difficult to not know and to be silly, and in the same way as it can become difficult to connect to power, and like giving people those experiences means they can kind of reintegrate that. It can be part of their range.
Yeah, yeah, because as I say, we all want to be empowered, and if we've shamed that or made it scary or made it bad, lots of people have made power bad because they've had experience of like unhealthy uses of power, then like, yeah, we try and push that away, but we can't push it away. It's going to come out in some shape or form. So,
Right.
we can
So
access.
like suppressed power
Yeah,
might be like I'm just freestyling. I don't really know, but suppressed power makes me think of like bitterness and resentment and like passive
yeah,
aggression and things like that. It's like I want to be able to control my life, but I'm feeling helpless. But and then it comes out in all these not very fun ways.
yeah. I like in the freestyling. That's
I
what
just
sounds
started
like the
that.
whole thing is that.
I started that sentence and I thought I'm way out of my depth saying this, but I'm just going to go on anyway.
No,
Um,
honestly, it's
yeah,
like it's exactly, yeah, exactly what I have in mind. And I think of like power that people are trying to reject is it will come out in those ways.
yeah,
Yeah, it will come out. We all want
and
power. We can do it in a really conscious way, and like, or it's gonna just bubble away under the surface, like you're saying, resentment or like manipulation is another really like common strategy as well. So
yeah. We all
yeah.
want joy and connection as well, I think.
Mm,
And if and a lot of society isn't set up to make that very easy because what we're offered is rather than like direct human connection, we're offered like leisure, like
mm,
passive consumption of
mm.
TV or cream cakes or alcohol or all these things. They just like buy this thing and relax. Um, but there's we have that hunger, right? For yeah. But
Mm,
we
mm.
keep saying word connection. I'm just
I
noticing
mean,
that.
it's
Yeah,
everything.
yeah,
It's everything. I think it's so at the core of kink for me. Um, and like you say, we crave connection, and like when we don't have connection in the way that we need it, because not everybody needs erotic connection, for example. Some people need mental or emotional connection or spiritual connection or other forms of physical connection. Um, when we don't have that, when there's a lack of that or a void of that in our lives, then that's when we reach for these substitutes. And I think like the way, as you say, society's set up, it's just like the substitutes are so easy to access right now. Like my phone, like, I need
oh,
connection.
distraction. Yeah,
It's just like, oh, I'll go on my phone, and it like just it's a substitute, but it's our bodies don't get the same like fulfillment, and so that's why we need more and more and more and more and more, when
mm,
really, there's these other ways that we can connect that are actually what we want and what we need, that we feel it in our body, and then we're satiated, and then we can like,
yeah,
okay, I can just
yeah,
enjoy that.
yeah. You're drawing like a food metaphor, like it's like kind of there's so nutritious food and junk food, right? And the
Mm,
thing with junk food is it's very attractive, but it sort of never quite hits the spot. It's kind of like
yeah,
never quite enough.
yeah.
Hmm.
Now I'm thinking about food and cream cakes, but no, no, no.
Excellent. Nothing wrong with food and cream cakes.
uh,
Yeah, it's just a metaphor. Yeah.
so I'm thinking, there are lots of misconceptions that people have about kink, and hopefully I'm kind of dispelling some of those by the way that I
Yeah.
describe my experiences. But what do people tend to get wrong or perceive about improv that you might like to correct them on?
Yeah, I think the biggest the biggest surface one is not completely wrong, but it's only part of the picture, is this idea of it all being about performance and being good and coming at it
Mm.
with a perspective of there's only any point if I sort of win at this, if I'm the best, then that's the point. And that frame puts people off. Like I'm not particularly talented at improv. but I can still enjoy it. And it also jams people up when they're engaging in it. If they're trying to be good, if you try to be good, you're losing already, right? Because you've jammed yourself up. So I think that's the biggest misconception. People thinking, oh, I have to be quick and clever and funny and witty and have massive general knowledge and loads of references and that kind of thing. I compare it to dancing. You know, you can watch. There's dance for performance where some people are really brilliant at it and you can enjoy watching them dance. But that's a kind of a different thing to enjoying dancing yourself.
Yeah.
So for me, the juiciest part of it, well, I enjoy watching improv, and there's this whole juicy part of improv, which is enjoying doing it, letting go of sort of being good at it. Yeah, I think that's the biggest misconception. You know, I tend to say if you're having fun, then you're doing it right. You know, what are some other misconceptions around kink that people have
Oh,
that you'd like to dispel?
I mean, I feel like there's so many. I think, you know, people will tend to conjure up quite similar images if you if you ask 10 people to describe, you know, what kink is like or what somebody is like who is in a dominant role. There's like, you know, a lot of themes that emerge from the media that will be kind of, it's always in a dungeon, that as a dominant person you're probably like wearing leather or latex, you're probably really mean and shouty, that it always involves sex is one of them as well. And I think it's similar to you. I think people can get fixated on the like being good. So a lot of people get into kink and they want to be good. They want to be like talented in a way that's like really tangible. And so they'll focus on like the physical skills, the physical activities. So they'll be like, well, if I buy like the best flogger I can possibly buy, and I learn how to like swing that flogger around in like really cool ways, like I can do 5 floggers at once, then people are like, wow, you must be like the best at kink. And actually, the way I like to approach it is like, I could do kink now in my normal clothes, which is what I tend to wear. I usually do have a cup of tea when I'm doing kink. I'm in my home, I'm not in a dungeon. And I can do many, many, many kink scenes without a single kinky tool or piece of equipment. Like, so much of it is about being present.
Mm-hmm.
So much of it, like, you don't need to touch somebody, you don't need to be in the same country as someone to explore like dominant submission kind of play. So I think, yeah, there definitely is kink that happens in kink clubs and dungeons, and people do well, that is part of it, but it's so much more than that. And actually, yeah, like when people try to be good at it, very similar to what you said, when like people try to be good at it, usually that's a performative thing. And if you're on the receiving end of that, it doesn't feel the same as somebody who's just really present with you and really kind of like responding to what's happening in the moment. So yeah, I think plenty of misconceptions around kink that I think I spend most days trying to like, yeah, demystify it and make it feel a little bit less terrifying.
Yeah, I guess people do find it terrifying. They said people find improv terrifying. Do they find
Yeah.
kink terrifying as well? Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah, yeah. The thing is the sign, isn't it? It's like it's a sort of a thing that many people have pushed away and said, "Oh, that's not a thing I do."
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything else, Lex? I wonder if
Mm,
what have we not addressed, explored?
I feel like there is something I want to name just around like that we're talking so much about the similarities, and in my mind there's
Yeah.
so much overlap. And yeah, I think that there are differences in the respect of like, you know, we talked about people might feel scared or embarrassed about being silly and things in improv. And I think there's another layer as well when it comes to anything related to kind of sexuality and kink, that there's a lot more kind of societal shame around it. So whereas people might feel that edge or that nervousness about going to an improv class, they might feel comfortable telling their work colleagues, for example, that they're doing that. Not many people are at that point where they can go into work and say, oh yeah, I was at a kink club over the weekend,
Right,
because
yeah.
you know, there's that extra level of shame that I think can be a barrier for people even becoming, like, allowing themselves to be curious about it. Yeah, so there'll be internal stuff to work through, and it's held in this kind of like, you know, societal dark shadow of shame, because it's, you know, that weird sex stuff that people do, and it's like, okay.
And what do you do to help people on that journey? Because there's quite a gap between I'm sort of aware of this thing and I've never tried it, to oh yeah, I'm actually doing it now. What do you
Yeah.
do that helps people, or any advice you've got for people who are just like curious but not actually involved at this point?
I think, to be honest, this is like the sweet spot of my work. I really love working with people who are curious, but maybe have never tried anything, or you know, maybe they dip their toe in the water and they've like not sure, and they're just kind of like, you know, they're dipping their toe in, but they're like, that's kind of like the sweet spot for me. And I think part of the way that I try and work with that is I feel very comfortable talking about these things. There's not much that people can bring to me now in a like sex kink fetish world that is going to shock me. And I like just having really normal conversations like this with people. And so, you know, whether people working with me one-to-one or they come along to a group thing, that's part of it. Is, you know, we talk about all of the feelings that are there, all the fear, all of the shame that might be there. We talk about these things, and there's like, you know, I'm just holding this like compassionate witness role of just being like, you like that, and that's okay, like I'm accepting you. And I really get that, you know, I'm only ever exposed to the people who have had the courage to get that far. Many people won't. But I think one of the things that I found helpful early on is that there are so many amazing podcasts out there, for example, and articles out there and books out there, you know, written by or produced by people who are like me, kink educators. They're doing this day in, day out. And I think I love listening to podcast episodes, because, you know, I can kind of like be just with my headphones in. They don't ever know that I've listened to it. But I can kind of like just hear somebody else talking about it, hear why they enjoyed something, what drew them to it, how they got into it. And I think that there's lots of ways that we can kind of calibrate that experience of like dipping our toe in, like coming back, noticing how that felt. You know, was that like an edge, or do I feel like I can listen to a bit more? Could I maybe go to a talk in person? Could I, you know, and just find steps. Like, you absolutely don't need to go from nothing to like a dungeon. Like, some people will never go to the dungeon. That's okay. You don't have to like that. You can do it like in your own way. That's the whole point of kink, is like, do it your own way. Like, follow what you actually want. Yeah. And I think, yeah, I just want to honor anyone who even like admits their curiosity, because I think there's a big barrier to overcome in the kink world. Yeah. I'm curious. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to ask. There's so many things I want to ask you about improv. I'm curious about how you got into it. I know I've heard a little bit of your story before, but I think that, yeah, my perception growing up of improv was very much as you described at the beginning. I was watching like Whose Line Is It Anyway, like all comedians. And I think sometimes as people doing this work, people might look at you and I and think, oh, well, they're obviously like super confident or like super funny or super like comfortable in their sexuality or whatever. But like, you know, I think it's really nice to hear your story if you're willing to share.
Yeah. So I did love Whose Line Is It Anyway, which was a British TV show before it became an American one. So it's sort of 80s, 1980s, I think it was quite big. I love that. And I thought, this is magic. What is this? And then I forgot about it for 20 years. And there's a great troupe in Brighton called the Maydays who perform improv. So I saw them performing and I was like, oh my God, I had that same feeling of like very drawn, and also there's no way I could do anything like that, like we'll push pull kind of thing. And yeah, my journey into it was a very difficult one for me because my background was a bit like I described earlier, just like very academic, very in my head, like my whole identity was around, I had grown around just being good at school, getting, being good at exams, answering questions. You know, teacher sets you some homework, did the homework, hand it back to the teacher. Teacher says, yes, very good. You know, just repeated that for, 15, 20 years. And I don't mean to denigrate that because it's not a bad thing, but it had left this whole part of me shut away, of not knowing, of being okay with being silly, being okay with failing. I think is
Mm.
um another big area for people, like to just try something and it doesn't work, and to go, whatever, do something else. And yeah, oh man, I dragged myself to my first classes. Like there's half of me, I used to cycle there, and that half of me was just like, no, don't do this. And that, what do you do? You could just do something else. I was like, no, I have, there's something in this for me. And I was right, there was. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, I found it very beneficial uh in, it's like re-embracing laughter and playfulness and um sort of silliness, but there's a kind of, it's a funny, silliness sounds like it's trivial, but I think I think joy and fun is actually quite a deep thing. And
Mm.
yeah, it's helped me a lot. I'm just more I am more fun and I have more fun uh as a result of improv. And it's helped me uh even in day-to-day life, to be able to step into situations that aren't, where there is no guaranteed outcome, and go, okay, let's just
Mm.
roll with this, see what happens.
Mm. Yeah. I remember doing the bike ride there and just be like, no,
Don't go.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's I think in, so when people talk about shadow and
Mm.
psychology, we often have this idea that it's all sort of bad things, right? But very often our shadow can be very positive, wonderful things about ourselves that we've disowned for whatever reason along the way. And for me, I recognize it in myself, that feeling of, I need this and I'm scared of it, and I need it and I'm scared of it. And that's, for me, it's like, oh, there's something there.
Yeah, I want to bottle that up and just every now and then
Yeah,
take a little whiff of it. It's so
yeah.
that feeling. Yeah, I really resonate with that.
And to
Yeah, and I
take
really,
it gently, as just as you were
yeah,
saying, Lex, for anyone who's sort of resonating with that, I think with that, it is important to be gentle, just as you were saying, Lex, of
yeah,
like, don't chuck yourself in, because it could be a lot of stuff there. Just a little bit, little bit, little bit. I
yeah.
probably threw myself into improv a bit too much to begin with. I think now I would try and do it more gradually.
Mm, yeah, I absolutely can say the same thing for myself with kink. I mean,
Mm.
I've generally in my life been a bit of a like throw myself in the deep end kind of person.
Mm.
And I think that like learning to calibrate and go slowly and to like allow time to feel and integrate has come like much more recently in my life.
Mm.
But yeah, I think I'm so glad you brought the shadow into it as well. And like, yeah, often, yes, I hear it so much like people thinking the stuff in the shadow is like the bad, evil, like really
Mm.
dark, horrible stuff. And it's like, no, it's just anything that we don't like fully feel comfortable with. And like, yeah, God, what a massive like common shadow it is as adults to like to be playful and to have fun.
Mm.
It's just, yeah, it really speaks to the value of, yeah, what you're doing, what you're bringing to the world. Yeah. Oh, I feel like I could
Oh.
talk for so long about this stuff. It's just so like this, a million ideas whooshing through my mind right now of like, yeah, of how they fit together and the skill sets and the transferable skills that you get from each of them that you can take out into the world. But I wonder if you, yeah, if you were to, if someone's listening to this, maybe coming from my side of the world, the kind of kinky curious people, and they're listening and they're intrigued about improv, like what would you suggest that they could do as a next step in terms of learning about?
Yeah, well, you say you can listen to podcasts, you can get to know people at a distance. That's nice. Um, there's lots of ways to engage online these days. And if you can, then going in person is an even kind of fuller experience. Uh, go to a drop-in, very common. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, my website is at playconnect.co.uk. So there's an email list and I do occasional drop-ins online. People are welcome to join. Yeah, I just say if you feel this thing of like, oh, I need that and I'm nervous, I think it's just good to distinguish between, nah, that's not for me. That's great. But notice this thing of like, oh, I sort of need this and I'm nervous of it. That
Mm,
might be worth exploring in whatever way.
mm.
With me, with someone else.
Yeah, yeah. And I tend to refer to that kind of space as like a comfortable discomfort.
Yeah.
It's like we don't like not endorsing people to like go and throw themselves into an environment that's like massively overwhelming and like, you know, going to really stress you out and make you feel unsafe. But like it's okay to feel a bit of discomfort
Yeah.
within your kind of, you know, your edge of resilience, like within your scope, your window of resilience. Like it's okay. Like I think sometimes we try to stay comfortable all the time. And for me, it's like, well, life isn't comfortable. It's going to throw things up for us. And I think, yeah, being able to feel that like, oh, but it go, oh, but there's still curiosity to
Yeah.
explore. That's, yeah, really great to listen to that.
Yeah. And how can people find you, Lex, if they want to kind of dip their toes into
Yay.
kink world?
So my business is Pleasure Rebels. So I'm at pleasurerebels.com. And I similarly do a lot of work in person, but also online as well. Whether that's sort of private one-to-one or with couples or triads. And I do a lot of group events and workshops and courses as well. And I will say I've done, when I did my improv, it was online with Andy, and it's, yeah, it's still a really amazing experience. So if you can't get to something in person, I think I got so much out of doing it online, and it helped me to like be in my kind of still in the comfortable discomfort. So sometimes like accessing things online, you know, we can be in our own environment. We're like, we have the screen, we're not actually there in the room. It can be a great way in. So yeah, I really sort of celebrate people offering online things as well.
Yeah, and there's something, sorry, I don't mean to take us on another tangent. But yeah, there's something about doing stuff from home that's actually can integrate better because
Mm,
it's happening in your environment so that what you're doing maybe can absorb better. So look, pros and cons to both.
yeah, and I think
Yeah.
I will finish at some point, but I feel like
But
like
yes.
for me, like it takes a lot of energy to do new things. in general. So like going into doing an improv exercise is massive and new and scary. It was for me, scary and excited, but scary, like all of those emotions. So to also add in traveling to a new place, being in a new physical environment, being in person with people like that I didn't know, that's a lot. And I might not have had like the social energy to do that. So like online for me, it's just like it can be a way to like, okay, I can get more comfortable with the actual improv, and then maybe over time go and do an in-person class. But you can also like I've always done it online, and I feel like it's just given me so much more of like a willingness to be in the unknown. Like, and I've never done an in-person improv class, and I feel like I've already taken so much from it. So yeah, amazing. Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks, Lex. What a fun conversation.